Your father knows you've embezzled the charity funds, David. The auditors arrive tomorrow.
The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as I sat in my leather chair, nursing a whiskey and watching the rain streak down the tall windows of our ancestral home. Sophie wasn't home yet. Again. My name is Luke Jarrett, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered my fiancée was cheating on me with the most insufferable trust fund baby on the Massachusetts coast. More importantly, I'm going to tell you exactly how I made them both pay for it. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The Jarrett mansion had been in my family for 3 generations. Built in 1923 by my great-grandfather, it sat on 5 acres overlooking the Atlantic, all weathered shingles and ivy-covered stone. Sophie had been after me to modernize it ever since we got engaged 8 months ago. She wanted to gut the library, tear down the servants' quarters, and install one of those hideous infinity pools. "It's so old-fashioned, Luke," she'd say, wrinkling her perfectly sculpted nose. "We need something that reflects who we are now." The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophie Hargrove was a marketing executive who specialized in making old things look new and shiny. She was damn good at it too, especially when it came to herself. At 32, she maintained the kind of polished perfection that required a team of professionals and a trust fund to maintain. Which was funny, because she came from the same working-class background I did. The difference was, I'd inherited money. She'd married it, or was trying to. The front door creaked open at 12:15. Sophie's heels clicked across the hardwood floors of the foyer, a staccato rhythm that had become as familiar as it was irritating. She was trying to be quiet, which immediately made me suspicious. Sophie was never quiet about anything. "Luke?" Her voice carried that artificially bright tone she used when she was lying. "Are you still awake?" "In here," I called out, not moving from my chair. She appeared in the doorway of the study, and I had to admit she still looked stunning. Her blonde hair was slightly mussed, her lipstick was gone, and there was something different about her perfume. It was heavier, more masculine, not the light floral scent she usually wore. "You're home late," I said, taking another sip of whiskey. "We had a campaign pitch that ran long. You know how it is." She kicked off her heels and walked over to the bar cart, pouring herself a generous glass of wine. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Strange," I said, watching her carefully. "Your campaign smells like Cade's cologne." She froze with the wine glass halfway to her lips. Cade Purcell was everything I despised about new money. At 38, he'd made his fortune in some tech startup that nobody could quite explain, including Cade himself. He drove a bright red Ferrari, wore gold chains, and had the kind of artificially white teeth that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. He was also Sophie's biggest client at the marketing firm. "Don't be ridiculous," Sophie said, but her voice had lost its brightness. "Cade wasn't even at the meeting." If I wanted to get cheated on by a cliché, I would have married a romance novelist. But here I was, living in the most predictable betrayal story ever written. The successful lawyer, the social climbing fiancé, and the flashy other man. It was so unoriginal it was almost insulting. Sophie's phone buzzed on the side table where she'd set it down. The screen lit up with a text message, and even from across the room, I could see the sender's name, Cade. "Can't wait for next time. Last night was wild." The mask I'd been wearing for months finally slipped. Sophie saw my expression change and lunged for the phone, but I was faster. Years of high school football and a daily gym routine had their advantages. "Give me that," she demanded, her polished composure cracking. "Interesting choice of words from your client," I said, scrolling through the messages. There were dozens of them, going back weeks. "Very professional relationship you two have." Sophie's face went pale beneath her expensive makeup. Luke, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You're very good at explaining things. It's your job. I set the phone back down and finished my whiskey. I'm going for a walk. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, leaving Sophie standing in the study with her mouth open. The rain had stopped, and the night air was crisp with the scent of salt and seaweed. I walked down to the cliffs behind the house, where I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below. 20 minutes later, I returned to find Sophie in my study, rifling through the papers on my desk. She was so absorbed in her search that she didn't hear me come in. "What are you looking for?" I asked quietly. "The deed or your dignity?" She spun around, her eyes wide with panic. "I was just what? Looking for proof that you'd inherit this place if something happened to me? Checking to see if your name was on any of the paperwork?" I walked slowly toward the desk, and she backed away. "Sorry to disappoint you, sweetheart, but this house belongs to the Jarrett family trust. Even if we got married, you'd never own it." Sophie's mask finally dropped completely. The sweet, loving fiancé disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "We'll see about that," she said, and stormed out of the room. I listened to her heels clicking up the stairs, then the slam of the bedroom door. Then I picked up the phone and called my sister Rachel. "Luke, it's almost 1 a.m. What's wrong?" "I need you to come over tomorrow. We need to talk about the house." "What about Sophie?" I looked at the scattered papers on my desk, then at Sophie's wine glass with her lipstick stains on the rim. "Sophie won't be a problem much longer." Rachel arrived at 8 the next morning with coffee and bagels from the place downtown that we'd loved since we were kids. My sister was 2 years younger than me, but she'd always been the practical one in the family. While I'd gone to law school and learned how to argue for a living, Rachel had become a nurse and learned how to actually help people. "You look like hell," she said, setting the coffee down on the kitchen table. "Thanks. You always know just what to say to make a guy feel better." "It's a gift." Rachel studied my face with the kind of clinical assessment that made her so good at her job. "What did Sophie do?" I told her everything. The late nights, the suspicious behavior, the text messages, and finally finding her going through my papers. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small disapproving noises. "So, what's your plan?" she asked when I finished. "That's where you come in." I pulled out a folder of legal documents I'd prepared that morning. "I'm transferring ownership of the house to you." Rachel nearly choked on her coffee. "What? Luke, you can't." "I can, and I am. The trust allows for transfer to family members. You'll own it outright, which means Sophie can never claim any part of it, no matter what happens to our relationship." "But this is your home. It's been in our family for generations. And it will stay in our family, just not with me as the official owner." I slid the papers across the table. "You can transfer it back to me later, after this mess is sorted out. Right now, I need to make sure Sophie can't get her hands on it." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, reading through the documents. "You're really doing this, huh?" She wanted a new house. She's not ready for how new it's going to be when she doesn't live in this one anymore. My sister signed the papers without another word. That's the thing about family. When it matters, they show up. After Rachel left, I drove to my law office in town. Jarrett and Associates wasn't the biggest firm on the coast, but we had a reputation for being thorough and discreet, exactly the qualities I needed for what I was planning. I spent the morning gathering evidence, not the dramatic hacking and surveillance you see in movies, but the boring, methodical work of a lawyer building a case. Phone records, credit card statements, receipts from restaurants and hotels. Sophie had been sloppy, probably because she thought I was too trusting to notice. She was right about the trusting part. I had been, but I was done with that now. Around noon, I got a call from Gina Martinez, Sophie's colleague at the marketing firm. Gina and Sophie had a complicated relationship. They were friends when it was convenient, but they were also competing for the same promotions and clients. "Luke, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Sophie's phone. What can I do for you, Gina? Can we meet? There's something you need to know about Sophie and Cade. We met at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar near the harbor that served the best fish and chips on the coast. Gina was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and looking nervous. I should have called you months ago, she said without preamble. But I didn't know how to tell you. Tell me what? Sophie's been talking about you at work, about how she's going to trade up once she gets access to your family money. Gina took a long drink of her beer. She thinks you're naive. She calls you small town behind your back. The words stung, but I kept my expression neutral. And Cade? He's been bragging all over town about his conquest. Says Sophie's just using you for your money, and once she gets what she wants, she'll dump you for someone more cosmopolitan. Gina made air quotes around the word, her disgust evident. Why are you telling me this? Gina's smile was sharp. Because Sophie got the promotion I deserved last month, and because I don't like seeing good people get screwed over by selfish ones. I bought Gina another beer and listened as she told me everything she knew. The affair had been going on for 3 months. Sophie had been using company resources to plan weekend getaways with Cade. She'd even used the firm's graphic designer to create fake wedding invitations, apparently planning to elope with Cade once she figured out how to access my family's money. She's not as smart as she thinks she is, Gina said, but she's definitely more ruthless. I thanked Gina and drove home, my mind already working through the next phase of my plan. Sophie was in the kitchen when I arrived, making herself a salad and acting like nothing had happened. Hi, honey, she said brightly. How was your day? Productive. I've been thinking about what you said last night. Her face lit up with hope. About the house? About us. I think we should put the engagement on hold for a while. The fork clattered to the floor. What? Luke, you can't be serious. I'm very serious. I think we both need some time to figure out what we really want. Sophie's composure cracked again. But the wedding is in 6 months. The invitations are already ordered. My dress can be returned. Or maybe Cade would like to see you in it. She went very still. What did you say? I said maybe Cade would like to see you in your wedding dress, since he's been seeing you in everything else. Sophie tried to recover, to put on her innocent act, but it was too late. Luke, I don't know what you think you know, but I know enough. I picked up my keys from the counter. I'm staying at Rachel's tonight. You can have the house to yourself. Enjoy it while you can. I was almost to the door when she called after me. Luke, wait! We can work this out. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to ruin everything. I turned back to look at her. She was beautiful. I'd give her that. Even desperate and panicking, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But all I could see now was the calculation behind her eyes, the way she was already figuring out her next move. You're right, I said. It doesn't have to ruin everything, just your plans. I left her standing in the kitchen and drove to Rachel's apartment. My phone started buzzing with texts from Sophie before I'd even reached the end of the driveway, but I ignored them all. At Rachel's place, I called Tommy Kowalski, my best friend since high school. Tommy had been a cop for 10 years before starting his own private security company. He was the kind of guy you wanted on your side in a fight, and the kind of friend who'd drop everything to help you bury a body, metaphorically speaking, of course. Luke, what's up? I need a favor, and probably your truck. This about Sophie? How did you know? Because you only call me after midnight when women are involved. What did she do? I told him the story, and Tommy listened with the kind of grim satisfaction that only comes from seeing your friend's terrible girlfriend finally reveal her true colors. So, what's the plan? He asked when I finished. I'm going to make them both wish they'd never met me. I'm in. When do we start? Tomorrow night. Can you get surveillance equipment? I can get whatever you need. This is going to be fun. I hung up the phone and looked out Rachel's window toward the harbor. The lights from the boats bobbed on the dark water, and I could see the outline of my family's house on the hill in the distance. Sophie wanted to trade up. She was about to learn that some trades don't work out the way you expect. The next evening, Tommy and I sat in his truck across the street from Cade's condo building. The place was everything you'd expect from a tech bro with more money than taste, all glass and steel, with a doorman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Nice place," Tommy said, adjusting the telephoto lens on his camera. "Shame if something happened to it." I laughed, despite my mood. Tommy had always been able to make me smile, even in the worst situations. We'd been friends since we were 12, when he'd helped me fight off 3 older kids who were trying to steal my bike. Some things never change. "There they are," I said, pointing to the entrance. Sophie and Cade emerged from a taxi, giggling like teenagers. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, and he had his arm possessively around her waist. They looked like they were celebrating something. "Jesus, she's not even trying to be subtle," Tommy muttered, snapping photos. We watched them disappear into the building, then waited. 20 minutes later, lights came on in Cade's penthouse apartment. Tommy's telephoto lens could see right through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Well, that's not something I needed to see," he said, lowering the camera. "Get everything you can. I want documentation of all of this." While Tommy worked, I called the building's front desk from my cell phone. "Good evening, this is the concierge desk." "Hi, this is Luke Jarrett. I'm trying to reach Cade Purcell in the penthouse. It's urgent." "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Purcell asked not to be disturbed this evening." "Could you just buzz his apartment and let him know I'm here? Tell him it's about Sophie." There was a pause, then the sound of the intercom being activated. A moment later, Cade's voice came through the speaker, slightly out of breath. "Luke, what the hell are you doing here?" "Nice place, Cade. Shame if something happened to it." I could hear Sophie in the background, her voice sharp with panic. "Is that Luke? How did he find us?" "I'm calling the police," Cade said, but his voice was shaking. "Go ahead. I'm on a public street, but you might want to check your parking garage first." I hung up and nodded to Tommy. We'd already been busy while they were upstairs. Cade's bright red Ferrari was still in its assigned spot, but it now had several new decorations. Tommy had used his lock-picking skills to get into the parking garage, and we'd covered the car with plastic wrap, then dumped a bucket of fish guts from the harbor all over it. "Think he'll notice?" Tommy asked innocently. "Hard to miss." We drove to Murphy's Tavern to wait for the fallout. It didn't take long. My phone started ringing within 10 minutes. "You son of a jerk." Cade's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Do you know how much that car cost?" "I'm guessing more than it's worth now," I said. "But don't worry, I hear fish is very nutritious. Good for the paint job." "This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer." "You do that. While you're at it, you might want to call a tow truck. I think the parking garage is going to have that car removed for being a health hazard." I hung up and ordered another beer. Tommy was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "That was just the warm-up act," I told him. "What's next?" Now we let the town know what kind of people they really are. Gina had been busy too. By the next morning, half the town knew about Sophie's affair. It's amazing how fast gossip travels in a small coastal community, especially when it involves someone who's been putting on airs about marrying into old money. I was having coffee at the diner downtown when I overheard 2 women at the next table. "I always knew there was something off about that Sophie girl," one was saying. "Too polished, you know? Like she was trying too hard." "And that Cade character," the other replied. "Driving around in that flashy car acting like he owns the place. I heard his car got vandalized last night." "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," the first woman said with satisfaction. Sophie's phone calls started around noon. She was panicking, and it showed in her voice. "Luke, we need to talk. People are saying terrible things about me." "Are they true?" "That's not the point. You're ruining my reputation." "I'm not doing anything. I'm just not covering for you anymore." My boss wants to see me this afternoon. If I lose my job, then maybe you should have thought about that before you started sleeping with your client. I hung up and immediately got a call from Cade. This has gone far enough, he said, trying to sound authoritative. You need to call off your dogs. I don't have any dogs. I have friends. There's a difference. I'm not afraid of you, Luke. You should be. That evening, Gina texted me. Sophie's boss called her in. Word is, she's getting suspended pending an investigation into her relationship with Cade. Conflict of interest. I smiled and poured myself a whiskey. Sophie had spent months planning to trade up, but she'd forgotten the most important rule of trading. Make sure you're not trading down. The next morning, I found a note slipped under Rachel's door. It was from Sophie, written in her careful handwriting. Luke, I know you're angry, but this has to stop. If you don't take me back and fix this mess, I'll ruin your reputation too. I have information about your family that you don't want made public. Don't test me. I showed the note to Rachel, who read it with growing anger. What information could she possibly have? Nothing that matters, but she doesn't know that. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Sophie always was better at bluffing than she was at poker. What are you going to do? I'm going to call her bluff. But first, I'm going to raise the stakes. That afternoon, I sent out invitations for a housewarming party at the mansion. The invitations went to everyone who mattered in town, business leaders, social club members, the mayor, and of course, all of Sophie's former friends. The party was scheduled for the following Saturday night. By then, I planned to have everything ready for the final act of this little drama. Sophie had wanted to be the center of attention. She was about to get her wish. The annual Coastal Heritage Gala was the social event of the summer in our little town. Held at the historic Ocean View Hotel, it was where the old money families rubbed shoulders with the new money arrivals, all while pretending they actually liked each other. I hadn't planned to attend this year, given everything that was happening with Sophie. But then Gina called with interesting news. Sophie's planning to make a scene at the gala, she said. She thinks if she can get you alone in public, she can manipulate you into taking her back. How do you know this? Because she asked me to help her pick out a dress, something devastatingly beautiful that would remind you what you're losing. I looked at myself in the mirror of Rachel's guest bathroom, adjusting my black tie. What did you tell her? I told her the red dress she wore to Cade's place would be perfect. I had to admire Gina's sense of irony. The same dress Sophie had worn while cheating on me would now be her costume for the most humiliating night of her life. Will you be there? I asked. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I picked up Rachel at 7:30. My sister looked stunning in a navy blue evening gown that had belonged to our mother. She'd agreed to be my date for the evening, partly to help with my plan, but mostly because she wanted a front row seat for Sophie's downfall. You sure about this? She asked as we drove toward the hotel. Sophie wants a public confrontation. I'm going to give her one she'll never forget. The Ocean View Hotel was built in the 1920s, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The ballroom was packed with the town's elite, everyone dressed in their finest and gossiping behind champagne glasses. Sophie was already there when we arrived. She was standing near the bar with two of her former friends, though I noticed they seemed to be keeping their distance. Word of her affair had spread through the social circle like wildfire, and people were choosing sides. She saw me the moment I walked in with Rachel. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hope, confusion, and finally anger when she realized Rachel was my date. She's coming over, Rachel murmured. Let her come. Sophie approached us with the kind of determined smile that meant she was about to cause a scene. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. The red dress was indeed devastating, cut to show off her figure without being inappropriate for the venue. She looked like a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. Luke, she said warmly, as if we were old friends meeting by chance. I'm so glad you decided to come. And Rachel, you look lovely. My sister smiled politely, but said nothing. We'd agreed that she would let me handle the conversation. Sophie, you look... I paused, letting my eyes travel over her dress. Familiar. Her smile faltered slightly. I was hoping we could talk privately. I don't think that's a good idea. Besides, I'm here with my date. Your date? Sophie's voice rose slightly, and several people nearby turned to look. Luke, this is ridiculous. We need to work things out. There's nothing to work out. You made your choice. I made a mistake. Her voice was getting louder, drawing more attention. Everyone makes mistakes. You can't throw away 2 years over one stupid mistake. One mistake? I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make her flinch. Sophie, you've been planning to leave me for months. The only mistake you made was getting caught. People were definitely watching now. The conversations around us had died down as everyone strained to hear our exchange. Sophie realized she was becoming the center of attention, but not in the way she'd planned. You're being cruel, she said, and for the first time, I heard genuine hurt in her voice. This isn't like you. You're right. The old Luke would have forgiven you and pretended it never happened, but that Luke was a fool. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, I thought, though with her it was hard to tell. Please don't do this here. You chose the venue, not me. She looked around the room, finally noticing how many people were watching us. Her face flushed red, matching her dress. Without another word, she turned and fled toward the exit. That was harsh, Rachel said quietly. It was necessary. But the evening wasn't over yet. As we were leaving the hotel an hour later, I saw Cade waiting by the valet stand. He'd apparently decided to make his own dramatic gesture. Luke! He called out, loud enough for everyone in the area to hear. We need to talk. I handed my valet ticket to the attendant and turned to face him. Cade was dressed in an expensive tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But all the expensive clothes in the world couldn't hide the fact that he looked nervous. What's on your mind, Cade? You've gone too far. Sophie is devastated, and my business is suffering because of your little revenge campaign. Your business is suffering because you can't keep your mouth shut about your conquests. That's not my fault. I'm not going to let you destroy my life over some woman. The casual dismissal of Sophie as some woman told me everything I needed to know about Cade's character. He'd been happy to break up my relationship, but now that there were consequences, he wanted to distance himself from the whole situation. You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with my fiancée. Cade stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He was about 2 inches taller than my 6 feet, but I'd been in enough fights to know that size isn't everything. I'm warning you. You're warning me? I laughed. Cade, you're a coward who hides behind daddy's money and drives a flashy car to compensate for having no personality. The only reason Sophie was interested in you was because she thought you had more money than me. His face went red. You son of a jerk. He swung at me, but it was the kind of clumsy, telegraphed punch that someone throws when they've never been in a real fight. I stepped aside easily, and his momentum carried him into the hotel's decorative fountain. The splash was spectacular. Cade came up sputtering, his expensive tuxedo soaked and his hair plastered to his head. The valet attendants were trying not to laugh, and several people had pulled out their phones to record the scene. You might want to work on your follow-through, I told him as he climbed out of the fountain, and maybe take some boxing lessons. Rachel and I got in my car and drove away, leaving Cade standing in a puddle of fountain water, looking like a drowned peacock. I can't believe he actually swung at you, Rachel said, still laughing. I can. Guys like Cade always resort to violence when they can't get their way with money or intimidation. What happens now? I thought about the housewarming party I'd planned for the following weekend. All the pieces were in place, and both Sophie and Cade had played their parts perfectly. Now comes the finale. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes coastal New England summers legendary. The mansion looked better than it had in years. Rachel and I had spent the week cleaning and preparing, and Tommy had helped me set up some special equipment in strategic locations throughout the house. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. I'd invited everyone who mattered in town, including several people who'd witnessed the confrontations at the gala. Word had spread about the fountain incident, and everyone was curious to see what would happen next in the ongoing drama. What they didn't know was that I'd also sent invitations to Sophie and Cade. "You really think they'll show up?" Tommy asked, adjusting one of the hidden cameras he'd installed in the main living room. "Sophie will. She's too desperate not to try one last manipulation. And Cade will come because his ego won't let him stay away." Rachel emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of appetizers. She'd insisted on handling the catering herself, partly to save money, but mostly because she wanted to be involved in every aspect of Sophie's downfall. "The guests seem to be enjoying themselves," she said. "Mrs. Henderson from the Historical Society has been asking about the house's architectural details. Good. I want everyone to see what Sophie was so eager to get her hands on." By 8 o'clock, the party was in full swing. The mansion was filled with the sound of conversation and laughter, and I was playing the role of gracious host perfectly. Several people had commented on how well I seemed to be handling my difficult situation, which was exactly the impression I wanted to create. Then Sophie arrived. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. A simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy, paired with pearls that had probably belonged to her grandmother. She was trying to project an image of wounded dignity, the wronged woman seeking reconciliation. The room went quiet when she walked in. Everyone knew she hadn't been officially invited, and they were all waiting to see how I would react. "Sophie," I said pleasantly, as if her presence was completely expected. "How nice of you to come. Luke, we need to talk." "Of course, but let's not be rude to our guests. Would you like some wine?" She looked confused by my cordial behavior, which was exactly what I'd intended. Sophie had prepared for anger, for drama, for a public confrontation. She hadn't prepared for polite indifference. 20 minutes later, Cade arrived. Unlike Sophie, he made no attempt at subtlety. He strode into the house like he owned it, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Nice party," he said loudly, helping himself to a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "I love what you've done with the place, Luke." Several guests exchanged glances. Everyone knew about Cade's relationship with Sophie, and his casual attitude was striking them as inappropriate. "Thank you," I replied. "Though actually, the house belongs to Rachel now. I signed it over to her last week." The room went silent. Sophie's face went white, and Cade nearly choked on his champagne. "What?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "I transferred ownership to my sister. It seemed like the right thing to do given the circumstances." Sophie's careful composure finally cracked. "You can't do that. We're engaged." "We're engaged, and actually, I can do that. It's called estate planning. Maybe you should have paid more attention during those conversations about my family's finances." Cade stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "This is bullshit, Luke. You're just being vindictive." "I'm being practical. I wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family." "Your family?" Sophie's voice was rising, and I could see the calculation behind her panic. Without access to the house and the Jarrett family money, I was significantly less attractive as a prospect. "Luke, you can't just throw away everything we had together." "I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that." The room was completely silent now, everyone watching the drama unfold. This was better than any soap opera, and they all had front-row seats. Sophie looked around the room, finally realizing that she was the center of attention in the worst possible way. "This is private business," she said desperately. "We shouldn't be discussing it here." "You made it public when you started sleeping with Cade," I replied calmly. And you made it everyone's business when you started telling people how you were going to upgrade your life by marrying me. Several people gasped. Gina, who was standing near the bar, smiled and raised her glass in a small salute. Cade, meanwhile, was looking increasingly uncomfortable. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. Sophie had been using him to make me jealous, and now that her plan had backfired, he was left holding the bag. "Look," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "Maybe we can all just calm down and work this out like adults." "Adults?" I laughed. "Cade, you're 38 years old and you still act like a fraternity boy. You bragged all over town about sleeping with my fiancée, and now you want to work things out? I never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to get caught. There's a difference." Sophie was looking back and forth between us, and I could see her realizing that neither of us was going to save her from this situation. She'd played us against each other, and now we were both done with her games. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I have information about your family, Luke, things that would ruin your reputation if they came out." The room held its collective breath. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone. "What kind of information?" "Your great-grandfather's business dealings during Prohibition, the real reason your family has so much money." I smiled and showed her the screen of my phone, which displayed a recording app that had been running for the past 10 minutes. "You mean the rumor that he was involved in bootlegging?" "Sophie, that story's been public knowledge for decades. There's a display about it at the Town Historical Museum." Her face went ashen as she realized her last card was worthless. "You didn't think I'd let you keep any real secrets, did you?" I continued. "I'm a lawyer, Sophie. I know how to protect my interests." Cade was backing toward the door, clearly wanting to escape before things got worse. But I wasn't done with him yet. "Leaving so soon, Cade? I thought you wanted to work things out." He stopped, trapped between his desire to flee and his inability to back down in front of an audience. "This is between you and Sophie," he said weakly. "No, you're part of this too. You both made choices, and now you both get to live with the consequences." Sophie made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Luke, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Anything except be faithful, apparently." The cruelty of the comment hit home, and Sophie's face crumpled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the months of lies, the manipulation, the casual way she'd dismissed me to her friends. "I think you should both leave now," I said quietly. Sophie and Cade looked around the room at the faces of the town's social elite, all of whom were watching their humiliation with fascination. They'd both been exposed as exactly what they were, opportunists who'd overplayed their hand. Without another word, they left together, though I doubted their alliance would last much longer. The party continued for another 2 hours, and I spent the time playing the role of the dignified victim who'd handled a difficult situation with class. By the time the last guest left, I was confident that the story would spread throughout the community exactly as I'd intended. Sophie and Cade had wanted to be the center of attention. Now they were, but not in the way they'd planned. The fallout from the party was swift and comprehensive. By Monday morning, Sophie's suspension from the marketing firm had become a termination. Her boss, apparently tired of the drama and negative publicity, decided to cut ties completely. Cade's situation was even worse. Several of his business partners had been at the party, and they'd seen firsthand how he handled pressure and conflict. Tech investors don't like drama, and they especially don't like partners who make spectacles of themselves at social events. I was having coffee at the diner downtown when Gina called with an update. "Sophie's moving out of her apartment," she said. "Apparently she can't afford the rent without her job." "Where's she going?" "Back to her parents' place in Worcester. Her mother is not happy about it." I felt a small pang of sympathy, but it passed quickly. Sophie had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. What about Cade? That's the interesting part. Word is he's blaming Sophie for everything. Says she seduced him and manipulated him into the affair. Classy. It gets better. He's apparently trying to get back in his investors' good graces by claiming he was the victim of a honey trap scheme. I had to laugh at that. Cade was even more of a coward than I'd thought. But the story wasn't over yet. That afternoon, I got a call from Tommy. "We have a problem. Cade's at your house." "What do you mean at my house?" "I mean he's in your driveway and he's got a baseball bat." I drove to the mansion as fast as I could, calling Rachel on the way to warn her to stay away. When I arrived, I found Cade standing next to his Ferrari, which had apparently been detailed since the fish gut incident, holding an aluminum baseball bat and staring at the house with obvious rage. "Cade," I called out, getting out of my car. "What are you doing here?" He turned to face me, and I could see that he'd been drinking. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes had the unfocused look of someone who'd been drowning their sorrows. "You ruined my life," he said, his words slightly slurred. "You ruined your own life. I just made sure everyone knew about it. I had everything, a successful business, respect in the community, a beautiful woman. You had nothing. Your business was built on other people's money. Your respect was bought with expensive toys, and the woman was using you to get to me." He raised the bat threateningly. "I should smash your skull in." "You should, but you won't, because you're a coward who only fights when he thinks he can win." Tommy's truck pulled into the driveway behind me, and my friend got out slowly, his hand resting on the pepper spray attached to his belt. Tommy might not be a cop anymore, but he still carried himself like one. "Problem here, Luke?" he asked casually. Cade looked back and forth between us, and I could see him calculating his odds. He was bigger than either of us individually, but we were sober, and he wasn't. Plus, Tommy had the kind of presence that suggested he'd been in more than his share of fights. "This is between me and Luke," Cade said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it's not," Tommy replied. "You're on private property with a weapon making threats. That makes it my business. I'm not afraid of you. You should be." The standoff lasted for about 30 seconds, then Cade's nerve broke. He threw the bat down in disgust and stumbled back toward his car. "This isn't over," he called out. "Yeah, it is," I replied. But I was wrong. Cade had one more surprise left in him. That evening, I was having dinner with Rachel at her apartment when we heard sirens in the distance. They seemed to be heading toward the mansion, so we drove over to investigate. We found 3 fire trucks, 2 police cars, and half the town gathered on the road outside the house. Smoke was pouring from one of the outbuildings, the old carriage house that had been converted into a garage. "What happened?" I asked one of the firefighters. "Arson," he said grimly. "Someone doused the building with gasoline and lit it up." The carriage house was a total loss, but the fire department had managed to save the main house. As I watched the smoke rising into the night sky, I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. "It was Cade," I told the police officer taking my statement. "He was here this afternoon making threats." "Can you prove it?" "I have witnesses." The investigation took 3 days, but the evidence was overwhelming. Cade had been caught on a neighbor's security camera returning to the property around midnight. His car had been spotted at a gas station buying a container of gasoline. And most damning of all, he'd been drunk posting on social media about making Luke pay. He was arrested on Tuesday morning at his condo, still drunk and apparently surprised that anyone had figured out he was responsible. The trial was scheduled for the following month, but Cade's lawyer convinced him to take a plea deal. Arson carried serious jail time, and with his obvious guilt and history of erratic behavior, a jury trial would have been a disaster. He got 2 years in state prison, plus restitution for the damage to the carriage house. But I wasn't satisfied with just seeing him go to jail. Cade had tried to destroy my family's home, and that demanded a more personal response. The day before he was scheduled to report to prison, I drove to the beach where we used to surf as teenagers. It was early morning, and the beach was deserted except for a few joggers in the distance. Cade was there, sitting on a piece of driftwood and staring out at the ocean. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. His expensive clothes had been replaced with cheap jeans and a t-shirt, and his carefully styled hair was now unkempt and greasy. "Enjoying your last day of freedom?" I asked, walking up behind him. He didn't turn around. "I wondered when you'd show up. I wanted to see you before you went away." "Come to gloat?" "Come to make sure you understand something." I walked around to face him, and he looked up at me. "You tried to destroy my home," I said quietly. "That house has been in my family for 3 generations. It's where my grandparents lived, where my parents were married, where I learned to walk and talk and become the man I am today. It's just a house. No, it's not. It's my family's legacy, and you tried to burn it down because your feelings were hurt." Cade looked away, unable to meet my eyes. 2 years isn't enough," I continued. "When you get out of prison, I want you to leave this town and never come back. If I see you here again, if I even hear that you're thinking about coming back, I'll make the last month look like a vacation. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm promising you. You had your chance to be a decent human being, and you chose to be a vindictive child instead. Now, you get to live with the consequences." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. It displayed a video of our conversation, which I'd been recording since I arrived. "Insurance," I explained, "in case you ever decide to claim I threatened you." Cade stared at the phone, then at me. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" "I'm a lawyer. It's what I do." I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at him. "One more thing. Sophie's moving back to Worcester. I thought you should know in case you were planning to look her up when you get out." "Why would I care about Sophie?" "Because she's the reason you're going to prison. If you'd kept your mouth shut about the affair, none of this would have happened." Cade's face went pale as the full implications of that statement sank in. He'd lost everything, his business, his reputation, his freedom, because he couldn't resist bragging about his conquest. "You orchestrated all of this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't orchestrate anything. I just made sure everyone saw who you really were." I left him sitting on the beach, staring out at the ocean and contemplating the ruins of his life. The next morning, Cade reported to state prison to begin his sentence. That afternoon, a moving truck arrived at his condo to pack up his belongings. Word around town was that his parents had disowned him, and his few remaining friends had stopped taking his calls. Sophie had already left for Worcester, driving away in a 10-year-old Honda that was a far cry from the luxury cars she'd grown accustomed to. Gina had texted me a photo of her loading boxes into the back seat, looking tired and defeated. I was sitting on the porch of the mansion, my mansion again since Rachel had transferred ownership back to me, when Tommy arrived with a 6-pack of beer and a satisfied grin. "So," he said, settling into the chair next to mine, "how does it feel?" "How does what feel?" "Getting your revenge, seeing them both get what they deserved." I thought about it for a moment, watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The carriage house was gone, but it could be rebuilt. The house itself was intact, and more importantly, it was still in the family where it belonged. "It feels like justice," I said finally. "Think they learned their lesson?" "Sophie, maybe. She's smart enough to understand cause and effect. Cade," I shrugged. "Cade will probably blame everyone but himself for what happened. But it doesn't matter. He's out of my life now." Tommy opened 2 beers and handed me one. "To new beginnings. To old houses and new wisdom." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The mansion creaked and settled around us, the way old houses do, full of history and stories and the ghosts of previous generations. Sophie had wanted to modernize everything, to tear down the past and build something shiny and new. But some things are worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth defending against people who don't understand their value. The last house party was over, and I was the only one left standing.